in human beings and also to the EU civil society platform. We have some members here with us in Brussels, and we have members online. I welcome you all. Don't hesitate to participate in the discussion we will have in a few minutes. This meeting is very timely. You all know what is happening in relation to Ukraine, and that we
Chair's microphone is off. The chair's microphone.
In order to prevent trafficking in human beings of those fleeing Ukraine and also protect them. But I will not be very long. I will pass the floor to the co-chair from the French Presidency, Elisabeth Moiran-Braud, and I would like to particularly welcome Mr. Lopez Aguilar, who is the chair of the Libe Committee in the European Parliament, the Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs Committee, and I would also like to welcome the vice chair of the FAM Committee of the European Parliament, Mrs. Radka Maxova. We have also with us Commissioner Johansson through a video message, and we have the pleasure also to welcome Sylvie Gaudin from the French Presidency. But I will pass the floor to Elisabeth.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, dear Diane. Good day. Hello to all of you. Hello to civil society, which is there with us today. We, of course, are very happy to see you here on this second day of meeting of the national rapporteurs, but also today involving the European Platform of Civil Society. Yesterday was a day which saw a lot of useful, interesting, fruitful discussion between the national rapporteurs, and we've already started to work. Our exchanges have been very rich, and now we're impatient today to be able to share with you some sort of common reflection. Now, that thinking is all about the challenges that are ahead. It's about strengthening prevention of the trafficking of human beings. It's about bringing an end to impunity of the traffickers by adapting our strategies to new technologies and make sure that the victims of trafficking are better protected.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. We will now listen to the Commissioner for Internal Affairs, Ylva Johansson.
Good morning. I want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for all you are doing. Since our last meeting, Russia invaded Ukraine. Nearly 5.8 million refugees have entered the EU from Ukraine, of which now almost 1.7 million refugees have returned. And we are welcoming these refugees with open arms. We are welcoming them as a union by unanimously activating the Temporary Protection Directive, following my proposal, giving refugees from Ukraine immediate protection. And we are welcoming them as Europeans. All across our union, people have opened their homes and their doors, offering beds to sleep on websites or directly at train stations. It's heartwarming and makes me proud of being European. But you and I both know from bitter experience that not everyone has good intentions. That when millions are on the move, traffickers seek to exploit the vulnerable, especially women and children, the overwhelming majority of all refugees. And since day one of this war, you, me, all of us have been working to prevent and fight trafficking. Right away, Diane Schmitt, as EU Anti-trafficking Coordinator, called you into action. Thanks to the two EU networks meeting jointly today, you exchange information, best practices and actions needed. And I'm very grateful that you mobilized so quickly, raising awareness, warning refugees, setting up emergency helplines, making leaflets and handing them out at train stations, shelters and registration centers, identifying potential victims, informing law enforcement authorities who launched investigations, cross-border cooperation. And we could act so quickly and decisively because we have a whole anti-trafficking system in place. The Anti-trafficking Directive, the strategy I launched last year, the appointment of Diane as Anti-trafficking Coordinator and her hard-working team, and of course you. Your patient work and experience built up over many years is paying off in these difficult times, allowing us to respond to this crisis quickly and effectively. And now it's time for the next steps. Since last week, we have a new common anti-trafficking plan, dedicated specifically for people fleeing the war in Ukraine. A plan that Diane will present to you in a few moments, but which you know already thanks to your active contribution. A plan to guide our actions, to raise awareness, to boost prevention, to step up on investigations and prosecutions, and to better identify, support and protect victims. And as national rapporteurs and civil society organizations, you have an essential role to meet the specific challenges linked to the war in Ukraine, and more generally in our joint fight against trafficking in human beings. You are Europe's first responders, helping people in need. Often you are closer than anyone to realities on the ground. I ask you today, tell us about your experiences, and tomorrow continue with your vital task, protecting people from trafficking.
Bien, alors je voudrais peut-être...
I would like to start by some sort of introduction. I'll say that the French political agenda is obviously a little bit complicated at the moment. You'll be aware of that. And we do have a Prime Minister today which has been appointed, but the government per se is not as yet completely finalized. So that's why I asked Madame Sandrine Gaudin to participate, Secretary General for European Affairs, to participate and to say something about the French position. Let me say a few words about Madame Gaudin, Secretary General of European Affairs, as I said. This is attached to the Prime Minister, which coordinates the French position in all European negotiations and animates the work of the French Presidency of the Council of the European Union. I'd like to thank her. I'd like to thank her because I called upon her very recently, and I'd like to thank her for speaking to us and showing us the French commitment to the fight against human trafficking.
J'espère que vous...
Thank you very much, dear Elizabeth. I hope you can hear me and see me. That's perfect. Commissioner, the coordinator of the European Union against trafficking, ladies and gentlemen, members of the European Parliament, national rapporteurs, representatives of civil society, it is a great honour and a great pleasure to be opening this session and participating in this second day of the meeting of the rapporteurs and the platform of civil society against trafficking in human beings, alongside all the eminent colleagues that I mentioned. And I would like to salute, and thank you in advance of your very strong implication, because against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, you have even more responsibility than normal in terms of reactivity and of providing the response by the European Union, because the solidarity that we have to show vis-à-vis Ukraine today, vis-à-vis these refugees, these people who are fleeing conflict, is a very high responsibility, and we have to meet that challenge. When the conflict started, as you know, and as we all are aware of, we saw that the risks of exploitation of these refugees was very high, because they are mainly women and children who come to member states, and clearly they attract people who do not wish them well, who want to profit from the situation, and the Commissioner described this very well. As you know, the European Union has a common framework, a common plan to fight trafficking, which makes coordination possible and which makes it possible to mobilize and maximize all the efforts that we do to avoid all these risks becoming real, the risks that these refugees anyway face. And all these efforts today, of course, are being made for Ukrainian refugees, but of course it would apply anywhere else. Now, the member states have made great efforts in the welcoming, and that's fantastic. We in France have set up a mechanism which involves an understanding of all the risks that refugees incur, with various levels of monitoring. When we welcome in refugees, we do ensure follow-up of what is done by all the various associations who work to the benefit of Ukrainian refugees. The goodwill, the volunteering work, etc., has been provided with a framework without in any way trying to rein it in or hold it back, to reduce its enthusiasm and this marvellous effort that's being made, the generosity that's shown. We nonetheless felt obliged to set up mechanisms to verify and register refugees so that we can cover and follow up on all the different situations that arise. We worked on the questions of trafficking, the risk of trafficking of Ukrainian refugees with the High Commissioner for Refugees, with the support of the interministerial mission, which is steered so well by Elizabeth, but also with all other associations, UNICEF, the International Migration Organization, various other stakeholders from the public and non-governmental sectors. And for months now, we've been drawing up various mechanisms to prevent harm coming to refugees, also focused on children, communication tools, so that they can be informed, alerted to the risk that they may well run. Now, as you know, France, above and beyond the specific effort being made for Ukraine, has always made the fight against human traffic a fully fledged public policy with a strengthened legal framework, but also the implementation of this framework under the very effective supervision of a coordination body at a national level, NIPROF. The Secretary General, Elisabeth Noirobot, is here and co-chairing your work with Diane Schmitt, the European Union coordinator. We've adopted a number of national plans which we adapt and modernise as necessary, and which are evaluated on a standing basis by an independent national commission for human rights at a French national level. So associations, the state, etc., we're all cooperating together to bring an end to the impunity of criminal networks and protect victims both within France and outside. We are preparing, and this will no doubt be the object of the work of the next government, the government which is setting up in France now, as you know, a new national action plan against human trafficking, which should be completely consistent with the European strategy to fight human trafficking 2021-2025. And the whole European framework, which we are well aware of, which we know well. And the idea, of course, is to underline the various concerns that I've just put to you and maybe fill in some lacuna, some problems with existing plans. The emphasis will be on prevention, better protecting the victims, and better coordinating our work and our actions. Of course, it goes without saying that coordination, awareness raising and outreach are absolutely essential. And that is why today's meeting strikes us as being most important. It's on the programme of the French Presidency of the European Union to mark a priority, to shed a spotlight on these concerns, the concerns that we feel, but which we know are shared across Europe by all Europeans and by international organisations and associations. There is no doubt in my mind on that. I hope and wish that this work today will carry forward this spirit of cooperation, of common mobilisation and determination in an area which is so very important, that of the fight against human trafficking. And on that note, I wish you a very fruitful day, and I regret deeply that I'm not able myself personally to be with you at Brussels to fully participate, but I will be listening and informed of all your work today. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Secrétaire.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary General, and thank you through you to France for your commitment to this important subject, which is the trafficking of human beings. France is very active, and I should like to thank you for having participated in this meeting.
The European Parliament, and really I would like to warmly thank Mr. Lopez Aguilar, the chair of the Libe Committee, for being here with us today. I would also like to thank you for the excellent cooperation we had since the beginning and the importance also the European Parliament attaches to this important file.
My pleasure, Diane, and I thank you for this invitation, this opportunity to gather with all of you, and of course to pay tribute to your work. I would also like to thank very explicitly the kind of work which is needed all around the table, all across the European Union and its member states, when it comes to preventing trafficking of human beings, particularly related to the situation that has been aroused after the war of aggression launched by Putin against Ukraine. For good reason, the European Parliament has been most concerned and active in following day by day the developments of this war of aggression and its impact on fundamental rights, which are the field of action of some specialized lawmaking committees in the European Parliament, which is the case, of course, of the Committee of Liberty, Justice and Home Affairs, which is a committee I have the honor to chair. And I would like to share with you some views from the perspective of the European Parliament, especially the Libe Committee, working hand by hand with the Women's Rights Committee, the so-called FEM Committee, the acronym we used to refer ourselves as the Libe Committee, Committee of Liberty, Justice and Home Affairs, which is represented here by Radka Maxova. Well, we're complementing my views because we have been working closely together in order to give account on the impact of this war on certain fundamental rights which are to be taken care of You know how the situation is like. The Ukraine war has resulted in an impressive number of women and children fleeing the war zone. Mostly women and children. We used to talk of more than 5 million, but it's more than 90% women and children. So most vulnerable, defenseless human beings fleeing a war zone. And when it comes to migration and protection-related issues, touching upon those many women and children, it takes a combined effort and a combination of all of the tools at disposal in order to provide for a response which is at the height of the European standard of commitment to fundamental rights. And that has somehow been the case. For one thing, the Temporary Protection Directive was finally activated. Yes, it's been there in place from 2001. It's taken more than 20 years to see it activated. Actually, the European Parliament had asked for it a number of times. We have asked for it when there came the time to respond to the so-called refugee crisis, which had to do with the Syrian civil war, with the protracted war in Iraq, with the fight against ISIS, the same we did when it came to the comeback of the Taliban to power in Afghanistan. So many women also under the impact of this tyranny, in violation of most basic and fundamental rights. We asked for the activation of the Temporary Protection Directive, of course. But finally, we have seen it in place. It's been activated by a decision of the Council. And of course, we welcome this activation of the Temporary Protection Directive, because support and assistance to these million women and children has to be provided and financed, properly financed, because it's taken money. And of course, the European Parliament has also been active in supporting the allocations, the allowances, the extraordinary funds that had to be mobilized, an increase of the Solidarity Fund, of the Internal Security Fund, and of course the Asylum and Migration Fund. Although this situation can hardly be described as a migratory situation. It's more than that. It's human beings fleeing from a war zone in the neighborhood, in the immediate neighborhood of the European Union. So it means that we also welcome that member states have opened widely their doorways to these human beings fleeing the war zone. And it's now for the European Union institutions to show the continuation of this support, and to the Commission in particular, and to all of the member states welcoming this large amount of Ukrainian persons in order to support concrete action for protecting those in most vulnerable situation that can become victims of trafficking, which is the concern around the table, which is our reason for having this conversation this morning in Brussels. So we count on the Commission to build a structure, funding coordination into a system which prevents and responds to the risk of trafficking of human beings. The risk of trafficking of women and children has been, of course, one of our major concerns. It has been expressed in a number of resolutions that we have adopted so far. Just recently, May the 5th, we adopted an important resolution underlining some of these specific concerns. First, the specific needs of women and children must be addressed in reception centers, and there has to be a referral to complaint mechanisms that should be made immediately available to those in that situation. Second, we have asked the Commission and the Member States to provide safe and coordinated transport between them to ensure that women and children are safe towards their destination, whatever it might be, the final destination, because you know how the Temporary Protection Directive works. It means that they are, of course, visa-free. They are entitled to free movement. They are entitled to live and reside at the destination of their will, of their choice. They have a right to be given access to labor opportunities, employment, healthcare, education for children. That is the impact of the Temporary Protection Directive in practice. But it means that, considering that they are to move freely within the European Union free movement area, we call Schengen, they should be provided safe and coordinated transport. Because in the outset, we all see that there's some kind of a spontaneous eruption of solidarity in the making. Many driving their buses, their cabs, their private cars to the borders of Poland or Hungary with Ukraine and assisting people there in the borders to be driven, to be given a ride to wherever, who knows. Yes, I mean, it seems that that should be saluted and welcome, but there's risk involved. And that risk is being seen. The whereabouts of many which is unknown, women and children which have lost in the way, lost track of the whereabouts and final destination, precisely because there has been an activation of trafficking of human beings and traffickers, which is a criminal offense, has a criminal dimension that has to be tackled and countered. Third, information should be available in all languages and formats, accessible to all groups. Fourth, unaccompanied minors, unaccompanied children, that's always highest priority, should be specifically protected. The European Parliament has been calling for uniform guidance for the reception and support for children, especially unaccompanied minors. And then fifth, the European Union should support Ukraine in investing in anti-trafficking awareness raising. That means that prevention measures on the Ukrainian side must also be enhanced in order to spread and disseminate information about these risks which are entailed to this situation in external borders of the European Union with its neighboring country, Ukraine, under Putin's aggression. Then, just a mention about the tools at disposal. We welcome the adoption of the Common Anti-Trafficking Plan to address the risks of trafficking human beings. Your work, Diane, as coordinator on the matter, your works as specialized people in charge for the member states to support potential victims among those fleeing the war zone. The plan and its goals should be swiftly implemented, and therefore cooperation between the Commission and the national rapporteurs is, of course, essential. But as you know, there's the mandate of the European Parliament, both of our committees, Libe and the FEM Committee, the Committee of Liberty, Justice and Affairs and Women's Rights Committee. We have been preparing together, hand by hand again, an implementation report of the directive against trafficking of human beings, which stems to 2011, as you all know. So we adopted in the plenary of the European Parliament, February last year, 2021, a relevant resolution which the Parliament called on member states to speed up the full and correct implementation, enforcement of Directive 2011/36, it is the Directive Against Trafficking in Human Beings. And therefore, the implementation report focused on the following goals, which I summarize. The need to step up efforts to support the implementation of the Trafficking of Human Beings Directive. 1. Second, trafficking of human beings is notably a gendered crime, and we need to address trafficking for sexual exploitation. And that means that it's a will of the European Parliament to call for the Commission to prioritize the prevention of crime of trafficking for sexual exploitation, including information, aware-raising, education campaigns, measures and programs to discourage and reduce the demand of the use of sexual services of victims of trafficking, but also to amend the Anti-trafficking Directive of 2011 with a view to ensuring that all member states explicitly criminalize, that means including in the criminal code of all of the member states around the table, the use of all services provided by victims of trafficking, including labor exploitation and sexual exploitation, because it is a fact that the prostitution landscape all across the European Union, that is, the prostitution landscape in each and every one member state of the European Union, is now incarnated in women victims of trafficking. Victims have been trafficked into the European Union for the purposes of sexual exploitation, and it's impossible to ignore it. It's impossible to ignore that when you use the sexual services of victims of trafficking of human beings, you're doing something that it's not only morally rebuttable, not only something that is to be rejected in moral terms, but also something that is to be punished in legal terms by means of criminal law, And that is the purpose of the mandate that we have endorsed in this relevant resolution of the European Parliament, asking for the Commission to review Article 18 of the Anti-trafficking Directive precisely for this purpose. And we are awaiting the Commission proposal as a step in this regard anytime soon, this mandate of the European Parliament. The European Parliament reports finally takes note of the criminal networks taking advantage of migration challenges. This is also addressed in our report. Challenges linked to migration, including gender perspective, due to attention to children, utmost relevance, the current context, and the challenge faced by women and children fleeing Ukraine, outlining the need to ensure that all victims of trafficking human beings are identified and provided assistance and protection according to their specific needs, leading to fight against impunity. Progress registered by member states in discouraging demand, one of the major issues which is under the focus of our attention. So, just to summarize, the 2011 directive, the strategy 2021-2025 combating trafficking of human beings, the common anti-trafficking plan needing more than ever to be fully implemented. Therefore, coordinated response should be pursued to avoid that people fleeing the war are not a second time victimized, becoming for the second time victims of ruthless trafficking networks on EU soil. I always insist that those trafficking networks are not a foreign threat or a foreign action taking place outside the borders of the European Union. It should not be business if there were not complicits and actually offenders within the European Union. That is, of course, the very nature of the business model of trafficking of human beings. Shouldn't be complete if there were not also offenders which are criminally liable, which are to face their criminal responsibility within the European Union, which is the equation that we got to sort out together. And that is precisely why we deem it to be our duty to ensure both prevention, protection, and fight against impunity. And I only trust that this meeting will be a step in that right direction. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I found it also very interesting that you focus on the implementation of the directive, which is important because we are here with the national rapporteurs, and also on one specific point, which is the criminalization of the use of exploited services. This is a specific point we addressed yesterday in our meeting with the national rapporteurs on the situation in the member state, the legislation in the member state, and how we could or should go on in relation to the modification of the directive. So this is really a subject we are taking very seriously and which will be addressed in the upcoming proposal of the Commission, in line also with what the European Parliament was requesting. You also mentioned that the trafficking in human beings has a strong gender perspective, and here I would like now to pass the floor to the Vice Chair of the Women's Rights Committee, the FEM Committee, Radka Maxova.
Thank you very much for the floor. Dear colleagues, dear ladies, gentlemen, a lot of was said. Now trafficking is a very important topic and we need to have focus on this. It's honor, and it's true, it's honor for me to stand here today with you and to speak not only as an MEP and Vice Chair of FEM Committee, but also as a woman and a mother. I would like to thank you all for your joining us here today to talk about such an important issue as human trafficking is. First, I would like to start with a few numbers to put this issue into perspective. It is estimated that in the world, 40 million people are victims of human trafficking, and unfortunately, the EU is not an exception. While the amount of male victims of trafficking is in no way small, it is clear that this crime mostly affects women and girls, who amount to 72% of victims. On the other hand, on the side of perpetrators, the ratio is reversed. 3/4 of the perpetrators are men. What makes it even worse? Every 5th victim of human trafficking in the EU is a child. What is also important to understand is how the criminal organization use the vulnerabilities of their victims to their advantage. According to the latest UNODC Global Trafficking in Person report, undocumented migrants and people desperate for a job are in special risk of being victims of human trafficking, especially for labor purposes. The fear of being exposed as an irregular migrant without permission to work can be a powerful tool for traffickers, who typically threaten the file report with the authorities and can more easily keep victims under exploitation conditions. Migrants make up 65% of trafficking victims in Western and Southern Europe and 50% in Central and Southeast Europe. For this reason, I am especially happy that today We will be also focusing on the prevention of human trafficking of those fleeing the war in Ukraine, who are in an especially vulnerable position. I am especially happy that the Temporary Protection Directive has been activated for those 5.5 million Ukrainians who have already crossed the border. 90% of migrants from Ukraine are women and children, and we need to ensure that they will find a safe space here in our Europe. Allow me now to please highlight several points of the anti-trafficking plan. As for strengthening of awareness, I am happy for the Stay Safe While Traveling on the EU website that provides information to the Ukrainian refugees. On the other hand, I believe more is needed to be done to simplify the system and to provide people coming to the EU with clear, step-by-step instruction on what to do first, so that we eliminate the traffickers who might be misusing their difficult situation. Second, the awareness campaign should also focus on the general public to better inform and train citizens to recognize victims of human trafficking. If more people know those indicators and are aware that human trafficking is happening in the EU, in their neighborhood, we might be able to save people in their lives. Unfortunately, we can hear many stories of people masking as volunteers in order to hunt their victims. And I absolutely agree with the strategy that we need to know who are the people who are accommodating refugees, and we need to know where they are, especially when it comes to unaccompanied children and other especially vulnerable groups, such as people with disabilities. Lastly, I would like to address the issue of support to the victims. Sexual exploitation is the most common form of human trafficking both in the EU and in the world. We need to make sure that those victims are treated in the most respectable and appropriate manner in order to prevent secondary victimization. For this reason, the EU should support better training of all frontline practitioners to be able to treat the victims in a most sensitive way and approach them according to their specific needs. As I have mentioned earlier, the issue of human trafficking is highly gender-specific, and therefore we need a gender-sensitive approach, especially when it comes to how we treat its victims. Lastly, Member States need to set up specialized systems to help victims of human trafficking, which might leave them physically and especially mentally scared till the rest of their lives. I would like to summarize. Human trafficking is especially affecting women and children, and we need a gender-sensitive approach. General public needs to understand that human trafficking might be happening in their vicinity and how to spot it and where to report it. We need to know that the Ukrainian migrants are safe, and for this we need to know that their hosts are legitimate and where are accompanied children and people with disabilities. Lastly, victims need to have access to health care and specialized mental health support. Our life in Europe has changed since 24th of February. Your work is more important than ever. Thank you for your work, for your activity, and I am enjoy our cooperation with Committee FEM in European Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this approach. It's very important to work together with the European Parliament and especially the two committees. And I would also like to thank you for the invitation a few days ago, a few weeks ago, to the common hearing on trafficking in human beings, which took place in the European Parliament. We have now time for a short discussion or questions you might have to our distinguished guests. If you are online, please don't hesitate to raise the hand. I'm looking first to all those the participants which are present also here in the room. Do you have any comments, remarks, points you would like to stress, underline? I'm also looking at the online participants. No, you do not always have the possibility also to have members of the European Parliament in the room. I see that there is a question from France representing the civil society organizations here in the room.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Geneviève Collat from working together to prevent the trafficking of human beings. It's a body in France. I'd like to thank the European Commission, and also I'd like to thank Diane Schmitt for organising this meeting for us all today. It's very important. And I think that the work that is being done on the trafficking of human beings in France has been very much motivated by the work that's being done at European level, working with the European Union, with the OSCE, with the Council of Europe. And I think this is a very important strand. And I hope that the next meeting will give us an opportunity for all people from the civil society and all people who represent the different countries at institutional level can actually come together, because I think that it really is actually a sign of strength, this network, and our cooperation is really the sine qua non for progress. I've got a brief question I wanted to raise today about the work that's been done, the huge amount of work that's been done since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. And it's a question of the non-accompanied children and their registering, because this is a great difficulty. How, at European level, can we improve registering these young children? We've seen some statistics, but what type of effective system could be implemented to enable us to register from one country to another the children who are arriving, if the children move from one day to the next? And the second thing is also on the common statistics. There again, I want to know how the European Union could help us in each of the member states, in each country, to have some figures which would be consistent between the various institutions and the countries as well, so that we have a very clear vision or more complete vision of the situation. And then also, what means could we have? How can we get greater means available to us? Because a lot of work that's being done by civil society with very few means, and very often that's money that has got to be used on accompanying the individuals. So it's a real issue for us. We know how important this is, that we have proper statistics, but we need to ensure that people who carry this work out can actually concentrate on that without us taking them away from the statistics work and trying to use them to accompany people who've arrived. They can't be doing both jobs at once. Thank you. Microphone with the chair, please.
L'OSCE.
Merci beaucoup.
Austria Festival. Thank you very much. I think that this has been a very interesting discussion. That's a continuation of yesterday's discussion. And it's very good that we have representatives from the European Parliament here with us today, and also a representative from the civil society, because I think that what we're seeing in this situation is that we've all got to work together, that we have all got to pull together. And it's working excellently. After the last refugee flow, which we had in about 2016, 2017, we had the impression that there was a polarization of society within Europe. In society itself, there seemed to be a real polarization. There were some that supported the human rights of the refugees, and others said that we can't actually protect them anymore. So whether they were refugees or economic refugees, whether they were from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other parts of the world, we had this situation. But today, I think, with these new flows of refugees, we really are given the impression that Europe is actually working together. The microphone has been turned off. The speaker has no mic. So we're very pleased to see this excellent cooperation, not just between member states, but between all levels of society. There are some countries which have got the larger burden of refugees, and our cooperation with them is working excellently. Austria has worked with a number of those countries, and we have actually set up our own task force for human trafficking Ukraine. So police authorities and other operatives are actually being given and exchanging information very quickly about the way in which the criminal networks operate in this area. Those people who are trying to carry out human trafficking or trying to harm individuals are actually followed quite quickly and identified very quickly. So that's a very effective network. Also, as civil society is here with us today, I just wanted to say that this has shown us that we can only be successful when the authorities and civil society and the NGOs work together. At the beginning, we had a prevention campaign with different starting points. We had the state ones carried out by the police, for example, and we also had other initiatives which started out in civil society, which was quite different from the very beginning on, but with good intentions, good motivation. And I think we saw that by approaching this from the two different angles, we were more successful. And now we do need to do a bit more work on this, but we can see very clearly that both components are essential. And it's only if we work along with the state authorities and civil society that we're able to cover all necessary areas and reach all partners. And I think that that's how we should work also at European level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang. I pass first the floor to Valvici from OSCE.
Thank you very much, Diane, and I want to thank Mr. Aguilar and Ms. Maxova for very interesting speeches on hugely relevant topics, also for the OSCE. I have two questions for each of you as members of Parliament. The first is, I know that recently an agreement was reached on the Digital Services Act, and I was wondering if you could share your thoughts on the extent to which this act could be or might be relevant to combating trafficking. And the second question is, I know there is currently a draft proposal on violence against women, and given the emphasis on gender, especially from both of you, I was wondering if you foresee an opportunity in the Directive on Violence Against Women to incorporate attention to trafficking in human beings as a form of violence against women. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for the questions and for the concerns that underlie the questions. Plutôt que répondre en français à la réponse, sprechende Vertreter aus der Reich, die Frage, die Sie habt gestellt, I'll make it in English. So the point I would like to share with you is that, first of all, there are concerns which are live on the table, and they're impossible to spell just out of goodwill. They have to be addressed with action, and as you have put it, cooperation. A whole lot of cooperation among the EU institutions, including the European Parliament, of course, as a lawmaking body. We are lawmakers, and the member states, of course, which are to implement the legislation which is put in place by the EU institutions, working as co-legislators, the European Parliament and the Council. Second, yes, we do care about most vulnerable human beings, having in mind that the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union entered into force along with the Treaty of Lisbon with the same validity as the treaties. and it's been in place for more than 10 years now, fully effective, fully binding for the member states. And I used to highlight that the Charter of Fundamental Rights is meant to protect not only EU citizens, it's to protect all human beings when EU law is implemented. All human beings, whether they are European Union citizens or not. So it means that the rights which are enshrined in the Charter of Fundamental Rights do protect foreigners, especially foreigners, when it comes to the implementation of EU law, especially foreigners. There are some articles which are meant precisely to protect foreigners in the European Union when EU law is implemented. And there are a number of pieces of legislation we've been talking of. The directive against the trafficking of human beings is a piece of legislation, it's EU law. The gender violence directive, which we have asked so strongly for it, time and again, this mandate of the European Parliament is meant to be EU law, binding for all the member states, and has, of course, fundamental rights implications, including the Digital Services Act within the so-called digital agenda, which is a package. Usually is the case in the initiatives that are taken by the EU Commission and are underway in the legislative procedure of which the European Parliament is a lawmaking body. They're all pieces of legislation and they have fundamental rights implication. And we have to care especially when they make an impact on most vulnerable human beings, on most vulnerable people. That is the case of women and children fleeing the war zone. And the only comment I would share with you loud is that, yes, there has been in the European Parliament, along the ranks and lines of the European Parliament and throughout the debates that we've held so far, ever since this war of aggression got started, there has been concern expressed as to the double standard that might be entailed by the fact that the European Union has responded so actively and so positively to the needs, to meet the needs of most vulnerable human beings fleeing Ukrainian war. That means Putin's war on aggression against Ukraine, as compared or as opposed to the kind of behavior that we have shown to many human beings that have been knocking on the doors of the European Union and have been regrettably mistreated time and again, or are held in some kind of a untenable limbo, some kind of an oblivion of fundamental rights, as it is the case of many hotspots that I have visited myself, and retention centers in the external borders of the European Union. I have seen quite a number of them. And of course, the contrast is painful. The contrast is painful. We asked for the Temporary Protection Directive many times. We have seen now it's been activated. Now it's underway. We celebrate it. But you should know that there have been protests in the European Parliament debates as to the contrast it shows as to the way numbers which are not comparable to these millions fleeing the Ukrainian war have been mistreated out of some kind of an assumption or a prejudice that they could not be handled otherwise, that otherwise that could lead to some kind of an untenable pressure or some kind of an invasion. That is the rhetoric all too often. When we see that 5 million have been handled positively out of cooperation and political will, the question goes without saying. Why should we panic in paying some assistance to 2,000 which are retained in some retention center in Latvia or in Lithuania out of the so-called hybrid attack that was launched by Lukashenko's Belarus against the external borders of the European Union not long ago, just some months ago. If we are not panicking before 5 million, why should we panic by 1,000 or 2,000 human beings which are in miserable conditions in retention centers in the external borders of the European Union? Why should we? Can't we improve our response and try to meet the same standard that we have shown of solidarity and full assistance to women and children fleeing the war zone as to women and children which are retained in those miserable conditions in hotspots all across the landscape of the external borders of the European Union? That is a question that I had the duty to share with you. Then I fully agree. It takes a real lot of cooperation and coordination, which is to be secured by the Commission as guardian of the treaties. Of course, coordination. At the outset, we saw, wow, there has been this kind of eruption, this kind of abrupt manifestation of solidarity in the making, people going to the external borders of the European Union to assist volunteers, NGOs, but there has been, let's face it, an over-reliance on NGOs. And solidarity should not be endowed to NGOs. That's not the European way. There should be institutional frameworks and planks and funds being activated in order to meet the needs of all those human beings, particularly to assist the follow-up of that development, because those children are to be schooled properly. Those women are to be taken care of their healthcare needs. For instance, yes, it is a fact that there has been sexual violence against women by Russian troops in this war of aggression. What about their sexual and health reproductive rights? What about the right to abortion in the member states of the European Union? Is it properly secured in all of the neighboring states of Ukraine? Is it secured in Poland? Is it secured in Hungary, as in Slovakia or in Romania? Or is it to be secured in every member state, which is the final destination of those women, whatever it might be, wherever they might end up? So that is a challenge. And of course, to pay full attention to the basic rights which are entailed is essential. And a final comment as to these pieces of legislation that you have referred to. Of course, all of the artificial intelligence, digital package, including the digital single, they are related to internal market, supposedly or allegedly, but they have fundamental rights implications. And that is always the focus and the point made consistently by the LIBE Committee. We always try to secure the added value that all of these pieces of legislation are consistent with the European Union standards of fundamental rights, particularly those rights which are under compromise or risk by these particular pieces of legislation, which are the rights of privacy, confidentiality of data, confidentiality of communications, which is worth noticing in a time in which the European Parliament has put in place an investigative committee on Pegasus, most worrisome, and of course non-discriminatory clauses, because let's have it clear. The EU standard in fundamental rights is the highest in the world, particularly in data protection, in confidentiality of data, in privacy. It's the highest standard in the world. We're proud of it. Also when it comes to non-discriminatory clauses. And all of those technological developments, including those pieces of legislation which are aimed to perfection the single market, including the digital package or artificial intelligence, do have fundamental rights implications that have to be consistent with this EU standard on fundamental rights, the highest in the world. and non-discriminatory clauses. This is not abstract rhetoric. It has practical implications. For instance, artificial intelligence, when it comes to predicting policing, has an implication on presumption of innocence. Has it not? For instance, artificial intelligence, when it comes to facial recognition, has an implication on privacy. Has it not? And on non-discriminatory clauses, the prohibition of discrimination, not profiling people on the grounds of how they look. That is also fundamental rights implications. So the point I'm making is that fundamental rights is the standard of which the Libe Committee departs from when it comes to tackling all of these issues, including trafficking of human beings. And that is why we deem that the risk of sexual exploitation or labor exploitation that is entailed to the situation of despair of those many millions fleeing a war zone has to be taken care very carefully, so that we do not turn a blind eye on the whereabouts or the type of criminal offenses which are entailed, which are linked to these trafficking mafias and trafficking nets that have been activated, attracted to the potential of the despair of those many million entering the European Union with no visa, visa-free, precisely because of the activation of the Temporary Protection Directive and entitled to move freely across the member states of the European Union. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you very much. I fear that we will come to the end of the opening session because you have also other commitments. I will turn to Mrs. Maxova for last intervention.
Very, very shortly, because Juan Fernando said a lot of. Concerning data, I think that there is maybe a problem that countries have different definition of these crimes and also different picking up of data, and we need to do common procedure. I agree that civil society is extremely important because they can work with the victims and they can might be unwilling to approach policies. Gender-based violence directive goes in absolutely right direction, right way, but there is much more that needs to be done, mainly in prevention, because if you know this procedure in real life, if you are victims, you see that, for example, our policies doesn't work well. They don't have feeling what is to be victims, and therefore I think that we need more train our authorities because we need to victims feel safe and not to be under secondary victimization. Concerning DSA, I think that it can help do more in this issue, but we need better cooperation between EU and our state authorities and online services. We need more explain why we want this DSA. But I think that it can help fight against human trafficking, and And of course, I fully agree that DSA asks for platforms to do more against this issue, against this illegal online content, and against human trafficking. And I absolutely agree with Juan Fernando that victims of sexual violence during war conflict need to be able access to legal abortion in all EU member states. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Only to add a few words on data. We are working very closely with Eurostat, and there have been already some improvements in relation to the quality and the availability of data. And we are looking also to this in the context of the evaluation of the directive. On protection of children is one of the 10-point plan, one of the action. Protection of children in general. Obviously, this is not only linked to trafficking. And we are also working on a system for the registration of all those who get temporary protection, in order also that there can be an exchange between the member states with the support of the European Commission, and in full respect of data protection issues, obviously. And as you might have seen in our common plan on anti-trafficking, we underline also the importance of registration of unaccompanied minors, which has to happen also at national level. In relation to the different directives, violence against women, Digital Service Act, obviously also in the evaluation on the anti-trafficking directive, we look not only what is the complementarity between the anti-trafficking directive and other EU legislation, but also perhaps what is missing and has to be addressed in the context of a possible modification of our legislation. So I wanted to add these few points. I know that there were questions also now from someone online and from someone in the room. We will have the possibility to continue our discussion among us, also on the anti-trafficking plan and on the online dimension of trafficking human beings, as well as on labor exploitation. And so I suggest that we have a short break, and I would like to thank again the honorable members of the Parliament for being present today and for the discussion. Thank you very much. We see each other in 15 minutes. Thank you.